It was the first days of January 2017. Almost 100 ISIS fighters, battered, dispersed, and fleeing, had thrown together a crude camp in the heart of the Libyan waste. Supplies were dwindling. They were miles from any town where they could melt away, and their only weapons were inexpensive rifles. Still, they clung to the hope of striking back, and each day they edged closer to repaying their foes. None of the militants saw the hunters descending from above. The attackers came in a trio, invisible to radar, engineered to erase entire cities and vanish without leaving a trace. One blow from them could obliterate a nuclear installation. A ragtag group in the desert hardly posed a threat. The bombers about to unleash hell over the sand had come to make a statement. Back in Pico Rivera, California, the morning started like any other. A civilian car rolled past the gates of a defunct Ford plant. As the doors opened, a handful of men stepped out and walked purposefully into the building. Inside, a security guard waited. Without speaking, he waved them down a shadowy corridor. Fluorescent tubes hummed overhead as they moved past rows of locked doors and darkened windows. At the corridor's end was a single room containing only a polygraph and the technician who ran it. The men shrugged off their jackets without being asked. They knew the procedure. One after another they sat, were fastened into place, and muttered the same pledge. They had told nobody, no friends, no relatives. Outside the chain of command, not a soul knew what was hidden there. The technician watched the stylus draw straight lines on the chart. They were being honest. After a decade of Cold War brinkmanship that had nearly escalated into full-scale nuclear war, the United States and the Soviet Union publicly decided to put limits on weapon production. That was the story the world was given. Behind the scenes, however, military planners on both sides kept sketching concepts for arms the world had never seen. In the U.S., officials realized that if nuclear warheads were ever again aimed at the homeland, the situation might not go in their favor. They needed a new class of attacker, one that was effectively invisible, that could slip off radar as it climbed, cross continents undetected, and if deterrence failed, deliver nuclear strikes at the Kremlin. Until then, it sounded like science fiction. But beginning around 1974, designers started to unlock radar evasion techniques, novel surface angles, experimental composite materials, and ways to quiet engine noise. DARPA urged American aerospace firms to harness these discoveries and produce a design that could become the country's stealthiest instrument of mass destruction. The program was ultra-secret, requiring frequent background checks and special clearances. Although federal employees knew the program existed, even many senior politicians were kept in the dark. The initiative turned into one of the priciest undertakings in U.S. defense history. Construction and upkeep of each airplane topped the billion-dollar mark, and a single flight hour could cost as much as $135,000. Monthly maintenance bills swelled toward $3.5 million, provoking uproar among lawmakers. Some pushed to cut the fleet. Others questioned whether the effort made sense at all. When the aircraft was finally revealed, though, it was obvious that despite the staggering price tag and clandestine nature, it was one of the most remarkable flying machines ever created. The public unveiling happened on November 22, 1988, at Air Force Plant 42 in California. After years of rumors, the world finally saw the B-2 Spirit. Crowds of journalists and aviation specialists gathered, notebooks in hand, but finding words proved difficult. At first glance, it resembled a craft from another world rather than a traditional military plane. No distinct fuselage, no tail, no vertical fins, only a single sweeping black wing. It spanned 172 feet and stood about 17 feet tall, its silhouette so smoothly contoured that, seen head-on, it seemed to dissolve into the horizon. Despite its slender profile, the B-2 concealed devastating power. Its bomb bays could hold up to 40,000 pounds of munitions. Whether carrying GPS-guided conventional bombs or strategic nuclear warheads, the aircraft could strike virtually anywhere and return unseen, thanks to a 6,000 nautical mile range and in-flight refueling that let it reach distant targets without landing. Its shape and continuous curves produced a radar signature so tiny, enemy systems might register it as no larger than a bird. Its carbon graphite skin was treated with radar-absorbing substances and finished in a matte charcoal gray that allowed it to disappear into the night. Its engines sat recessed well inside the wing, fed by titanium-lined ducts and fitted with exhaust coolers to cut infrared signatures. There were no afterburners, removing sudden heat bursts and loud trails while it cruised as high as 50,000 feet. The B-2 represented the definitive response to the growing Soviet menace. But as the Spirit began its maiden test flights in the late 1980s, its destiny grew uncertain. The Soviet Union dissolved, and the adversary America had built the plane to face ceased to exist. By the time the B-2 reached full operational status, the foe it was designed to defeat had vanished, and the Great War it was supposed to fight would never happen. Still, the aircraft was too remarkable and capable to abandon. The United States had poured vast sums into the Spirit, and letting it sit idle on a runway was not an option. In 1999, at Whiteman Air Force Base in Missouri, the huge hangar doors strained open to reveal 6 B-2 Spirits. They rolled out and, one after another, climbed into the sky. Crews of 2 or 3 aboard each bomber engaged autopilot for a long-range strike to Yugoslavia, where government forces had launched a brutal campaign against Kosovar Albanian separatists and drawn NATO, led by the United States, into action. The conflict had been raging for more than a year, and Washington hoped its silent predator could end it. This was the B-2's first combat deployment, and despite its multi-million-dollar design, there was no certainty it could conclude a war across the Atlantic. After more than 15 hours of continuous flight, the Spirits arrived over targets deep inside Yugoslavia. The bomb bays opened and joint direct attack munitions, JDAMs, were released. In earlier wars, U.S. bombers had used area bombing, saturating wide zones and risking heavy civilian loss. The B-2 took a different approach: surgical strikes. At first, the JDAMs fell like ordinary free-fall bombs, then their guidance systems activated. Each munition corrected its path in mid-air with astonishing precision. Some veered left, others right, each homing in on a designated aim point and impacting with near-pinpoint accuracy. Those that missed did so by only a matter of feet, keeping collateral damage to a minimum. It was the first combat use of GPS-guided JDAM smart bombs, and the effect was ruthlessly effective. The Spirits returned roughly 30 hours after takeoff, were quickly refitted and refueled, and launched again. Over the following days, B-2s flew 50 precision sorties, dropping about 11% of all ordnance used in the campaign, while accounting for only a small portion of NATO's roughly 34,000 airstrikes. Within weeks, Yugoslavia conceded. In subsequent years, the B-2 continued to rack up missions in prominent U.S. campaigns, including long-range operations in Afghanistan, where it flew from Missouri to Kandahar and back on marathon sorties lasting up to 44 hours, striking Taliban infrastructure ahead of ground forces. Perhaps one of the most notable later deployments came in 2017, when the Spirits were called upon to hit an unexpected target. During Barack Obama's presidency, NATO launched a new intervention in Libya aiming to remove Muammar Gaddafi, accused of human rights abuses and support for cross-border terrorism. Western forces and rebel groups swept toward Tripoli looking for Gaddafi, but he was gone. U.S. intelligence teams combed satellite feeds and signals, concluding he'd fled into the deep Libyan desert and might be regrouping with loyal tribes for a last counterattack. American forces moved to stop him before he could spark a new round of fighting. Then a satellite phone transmission picked him out on U.S. surveillance feeds. Gaddafi had just revealed his location. Within minutes, a Predator drone, piloted remotely from a secure base near Las Vegas, crossed the Libyan wastes and scanned the ground below. Its sensors locked onto a convoy about 75 vehicles strong, kicking up dust as it pushed west of Sirte. The command came and the Predator fired a Hellfire missile. Seconds later, French Mirage 2000D fighters dove in to join the strike. Unleashing a coordinated air assault, the convoy fragmented as vehicles scattered to avoid the incoming explosions. But from overhead, the pilots couldn't be sure which truck held Gaddafi, giving him just enough time to evade the worst of the bombardment and drive through the missile barrage. Once clear of the strikes, his group abandoned the wreckage and slipped into a concrete drainage culvert, hoping to wait out the assault. Local Libyan forces soon found their position, closed in, and dragged him out of hiding, executing him on the spot. NATO's mission had achieved its aim. and the dictator who had ruled Libya for decades was dead. But no plan existed for aftermath, a misstep President Obama would later call his worst mistake. With Gaddafi removed and no functioning government to take his place, Libya unraveled. Borders dissolved, warlords vied for control, and militias filled the streets. The collapse created ideal conditions for extremist movements to gain a foothold, and ISIS, watching from its bases in Syria and Iraq, saw an opening to expand into North Africa. American officials watched in alarm as Libyan militants began swearing allegiance to ISIS. Fighters streamed across borders, and their ranks swelled into the thousands. Within months, ISIS had planted its flag on Libyan territory, imposed Sharia in areas it controlled, and opened a new front in its self-declared caliphate. Civil war erupted between fragmented Libyan factions, trying to expel the invaders, and those who either joined or were coerced by ISIS cities became fortresses. ISIS fighters wired streets with mines, booby-trapped alleys, and turned buildings into kill zones. Ground operations against them quickly proved costly and hazardous, so the United States turned again to airpower. Drones circled overhead as pilots monitored grainy infrared feeds and struck moving targets with surgical precision. But the numbers were too large and the terrain too vast for drones alone to finish the campaign. The U.S. escalated to manned fighter sorties and attack helicopters, tasked with carrying out hundreds of strikes against ISIS strongholds while trying to limit civilian harm. The air campaign ground forward, and it worked enough for pro-Western Libyan forces to press advances, yet fully eliminating the militants proved elusive. Whenever bombs fell, fighters melted away. The U.S. Air Force even nicknamed them squirters. Under pressure, they didn't hold their ground. They seeped into new hideouts, often in urban areas where American aircraft were constrained. One such squirter band of roughly 100 fighters fled to the desert on the outskirts of Sirte and quickly set up 2 crude camps, apparently regrouping before launching another attack on Libyan towns, or perhaps striking U.S. allies. For those ISIS loyalists, the move was perilous. They were exposed in open sand with no air defenses, no concealment, and no civilian population to shield them from American strikes. They had effectively painted a target on themselves. The Navy proposed a solution at once. Fire Tomahawk cruise missiles from ships in the Mediterranean, let them skim low over the Libyan sands until they found the ISIS camps, and wipe them out. At roughly $1 million apiece, the missiles were expensive, but Washington was prepared to bear the cost to eliminate the ISIS presence. Analysts studying the area, however, questioned whether ship-launched strikes were the best choice. The encampments were not formal bases but scattered, improvised sites, with dozens of fighters constantly on the move across wide terrain. A single cruise missile strike might inflict damage, but it would not catch everyone. Too many militants would survive and melt away into the desert again. The only way to guarantee a comprehensive purge, planners concluded, was a surgical airstrike. Almost any U.S. bomber could have executed the mission. Without serious risk, a B-52, or even a B-1 could have descended on the positions and finished the job, but the White House opted for something else. The B-2. The decision raised eyebrows across the services. Many officers wondered why the administration would commit its most capable and costly asset against a low-threat desert encampment of lightly armed jihadists. Some argued the move sought to justify the aircraft's operating budget before the fiscal year closed. Others suggested it was meant as a message to potential adversaries in Moscow, Tehran, or Pyongyang. A few dismissed it as a legacy flourish from an outgoing president who wanted a dramatic finale. Officially, after tactical review, the B-2 was judged the best platform for ensuring total, coordinated destruction of the target. The order came in early January. A secure line at Whiteman Air Force Base, home of the B-2 fleet, lit up with a single directive. The 509th Bomb Wing would deploy to Libya. The unit's lineage ran back to World War II, when its predecessors delivered the atomic strikes on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Now, more than 7 decades later, its crews were preparing for another historic mission. Lieutenant Colonel Nicola Polidor, commander of Detachment 5, 29th Training Systems Squadron, said in an interview, We train every day so we can answer the call tomorrow. When the call arrived, base personnel moved like clockwork. More than 100 people clandestinely loaded roughly 80,000 pounds of precision munitions into the bomb bays of 3 Spirits. About a quarter of the weapons were pre-programmed in the U.S., ready to hunt vehicles or bunkers as soon as the aircraft entered Libyan airspace. The remainder would be assigned targets in flight using live intelligence as the bombers closed in. Polydor explained, "It's like a flying computer. We can enter pressure, airspeed, or a target from that panel and send it to the weapon. The mission, however, would be arduous. As with all B-2 missions, it would be an ultra-long-range strike, more than 30 hours round trip with no interim stops." The Spirit's interior offered no comforts, no sleeping quarters, no galley, no refrigeration. Crews packed microwavable meals and shared a thin inflatable mattress barely adequate for anyone taller than about 5'8". For that reason, airmen were given a mandatory 3-day rest before launch, though many were already accustomed to such marathon flights. When the moment came, the stealth bombers rolled out and lifted off at 30-second intervals, cutting a path over Chicago, past New York, and out over the Atlantic. Storm cells loomed ahead on the radar. Bad news, because the B-2's design makes it more vulnerable to lightning damage and requires it to keep a wider distance from storms than other aircraft. Crews navigated safe corridors around the weather, while also hunting for tanker aircraft, KC-135s and KC-10s, hidden behind cloud layers to perform in-flight refueling. Experts note that refueling a B-2 is one of its toughest tasks, often requiring pilots to disengage autopilot and hold extremely precise positions while the tanker connects its hose to the bomber's fuel receptacle. As one commander known as Scatter put it, the airplane is built to go into combat and be low-observable. It's not designed to make it easy on us. It's built to bomb a country, not to land at LAX. Despite the challenges, the Spirits reached the Mediterranean roughly 15 hours after takeoff and soon sighted the Libyan coastline. As they crossed into the target region, they went into stealth mode, powering down emissions to reduce their radar signature to near zero. Drones were ordered to clear the airspace and withdraw quietly so as not to alert the enemy. Cruising at about 480 mph and above 35,000 feet, the B-2s relied on satellite-guided munitions to find and strike targets. The crews only needed to reach a launch acceptability region about 10 miles from the camps to guarantee maximum effect. When the pilots crossed that boundary, authorization to strike arrived. Bomb bays opened and, in a 30-second sequence, 85 guided bombs released, nearly half of each aircraft's payload. The only sensation in the cockpit was a soft vibration as the bay doors cycled. Once released, the weapons followed programmed coordinates, executing a complex choreography in the sky as they found and engaged their designated targets. The ISIS fighters had no warning. Their first sign of the attack was a faint hiss of air before explosions erupted around them. From the cockpit, the crews watched orange flashes bloom across the desert as the encampment below was obliterated in real time. Most militants were killed in that initial onslaught, but as Scatter later observed, hitting people in an open desert is like stomping ants some may run and require follow-up strikes. That was why MQ-9 Reaper drones were ordered to loiter nearby. Any fighters who fled were acquired by infrared and radar and immediately engaged with Hellfire missiles and 500-pound GBU-12, paveway laser-guided bombs launched by remote operators. Thousands of miles away, the assault was devastating and brief. Commanders on the ground reported no survivors. Casualty assessments vary, but most accounts place confirmed enemy dead at around 85. Pentagon Press Secretary Peter Cook later said the encampments had been effectively destroyed. With the mission done, the B-2s banked and began the long return. 34 hours after launch, they landed back on American soil to a reception of senior officers, media crews, and the post-mission reward: steak, eggs, and cold beer, hard-earned comforts after such an ordeal. Nearly 40 years after its debut, the Northrop B-2 Spirit remained among America's most potent weapons and a go-to platform for sensitive global missions. In 2025, the Spirit flew again under direct orders from President Donald Trump, this time against Iran in an operation codenamed Midnight Hammer. B-2s from Missouri embarked on an 18-hour transatlantic run into contested airspace, maintaining radio silence for much of the trip and relying on mid-air refueling. When their bomb bays opened this time, 14 GBU-57 massive ordnance penetrators, 30,000-pound bunker busters designed to breach hardened underground facilities, fell on sites at Fordow, Natanz, and other key locations, each blast aimed at cracking reinforced concrete. President Trump later claimed the strikes completely and totally obliterated the sites. Still, military planners recognize that the B-2 cannot perform such high-end missions forever. Its successor is already in development, the B-21 Raider, also built by Northrop Grumman and promoted as the first of a new generation of stealth bombers tailored for a future of long-range, networked warfare that may span cyberspace and even orbit. Sleeker, more modular and digitally integrated, the B-21 is intended to be America's most advanced bomber. Though it has not yet flown combat sorties, at least 3 B-21s are reported to be in flight testing, signaling a new chapter in stealth aviation and suggesting that the story